What is this? You print this online? Sir, this is my official military ID. I'm a colonel in the Marine Corps. Yeah, right. Hands behind backs. Back up!
At 7:42 a.m. inside Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's TSA checkpoint Charlie, a TSA officer and an airport police officer publicly handcuffed a black man in full Marine Corps dress blues, a silver star gleaming on his chest, while dozens of travelers pulled out phones to record. The man was Colonel Jeremiah Thaddeus Kane, a 22-year Marine Corps veteran, battalion commander, and combat-decorated officer en route to receive the Legion of Merit from the Commandant himself. The officers who restrained him, TSA Officer Brock Whitmore and Airport Police Officer Dale Pritchard, had already concluded based on his race and their own prejudice that he couldn't possibly be a real colonel. One of them would later be caught on security camera saying, "These people always think they're special." 15 minutes later, the Commandant of the Marine Corps was on the phone with the Secretary of Homeland Security. Federal investigators were being dispatched, and 2 careers were about to be terminated under the weight of what those 2 officers had done in front of 6 security cameras and 23 civilian witnesses. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the next story is one you don't want to miss. TSA Officer Brock Whitmore was 42 years old and had been with the Transportation Security Administration at Hartsfield-Jackson for nearly 11 years. He was known among some colleagues as a hardliner, a label that in his case meant zero flexibility, racial profiling disguised as thoroughness, and a thick file of passenger complaints that HR had never acted on. Travelers, particularly Black and Latino passengers, had accused him of selective secondary screenings, invasive questioning, and what one formal complaint called deliberate humiliation tactics. A few TSA agents had requested shift changes after working with him, saying he treated certain passengers like criminals before they even reached the metal detector. That morning, Whitmore stood near the pre-check lane in a crisp uniform, energy drink in one hand, radio clipped to his belt, watching the early wave of travelers funnel through security. Business executives, families with strollers, flight crews, and a small number of military personnel heading to connecting flights. His partner for the checkpoint, Airport Police Officer Dale Pritchard, 37, 8 years in airport law enforcement, lingered 2 steps behind him. Pritchard rarely pushed back against Whitmore. He nodded at the same observations, backed the same stops, and followed Whitmore's judgment without question. Whitmore's eyes fixed on one traveler in particular. Colonel Jeremiah Thaddeus Kane, 44, walked through the terminal in full Marine Corps dress blues, leather briefcase in one hand, boarding pass and military ID already in the other. His bearing was unmistakable, shoulders back, stride purposeful. The ribbons on his chest told a story: silver star, bronze star with V device, purple heart, multiple campaign medals. He had spent 2 decades leading Marines in combat zones, training the next generation of officers, and serving in command roles that few ever reached. He was on official orders, traveling to Camp Lejeune for a ceremony where the Commandant would personally present him with the Legion of Merit. He had remained in uniform because the ceremony required it, and because he was traveling on military orders between duty stations. As Kane approached the TSA pre-check podium, Whitmore stepped forward, cutting across his path. "Sir, hold on, I need to see that ID." Kane stopped, made eye contact, and extended his military ID card and TSA pre-check boarding pass. "Good morning, officer, here you go." Whitmore took the ID, held it at arm's length, and squinted at it with exaggerated suspicion. His eyes moved from the card to Kane's face, then to the uniform, then back to the card. "This says Colonel." "Yes, sir, that's correct." Whitmore handed the ID to Pritchard, who had moved beside him. "You see this, Dale?" Pritchard glanced at it, then at Kane, and smirked. "Yeah, I see it." Whitmore crossed his arms. "Step over here, sir, secondary screening." Colonel Jeremiah Thaddeus Kane woke at 4:45 hours in his temporary quarters at Fort McPherson, the way he had for 22 years, without an alarm, body clock calibrated to military precision. He showered, shaved with the same methodical care he'd learned as a second lieutenant, and stood before the mirror in his dress blues. The uniform fit perfectly. It always did. He adjusted the silver star above his left breast pocket, aligned his ribbons in exact regulation order, and checked his cover one last time. Today mattered. The Commandant himself would be presenting the Legion of Merit at 1400 hours. Missing the ceremony wasn't an option. He arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson by 6:30, earlier than necessary, but Kane didn't believe in cutting things close. The terminal was already humming with the controlled chaos of morning departures. He moved through the crowds with the easy confidence of a man who'd navigated far more hostile environments than an airport concourse. His briefcase contained his orders, his military ID was in his wallet, and his TSA pre-check confirmation was already pulled up on his phone. Everything by the book. Everything correct. He joined the pre-check line at Checkpoint Charlie, noting the two TSA officers at the podium. One of them, a white man in his early 40s with a thick neck and the kind of stance that suggested he took his authority very seriously, was watching the line with an intensity that seemed excessive for a Tuesday morning. Kane had seen that look before, in checkpoints overseas, in small-town traffic stops during leave, in 100 different contexts where his presence seemed to trigger something in certain people. He kept his expression neutral and waited his turn. When he stepped forward, military ID and boarding pass already extended, the officer, Whitmore, according to his name tag, didn't take them right away. Instead, he looked Kane up and down, eyes lingering on the dress blues, the ribbons, the rank insignia on his shoulders. Kane felt the air shift. It was subtle, the way a room changes temperature before a storm. Whitmore's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. And when he finally took the ID, it was with the kind of performative skepticism that had nothing to do with security protocol and everything to do with disbelief. "This says Colonel," Whitmore said, holding the card like it might be contaminated. "Yes, sir, that's correct." Whitmore turned to the airport police officer who drifted over, a younger man with pale skin and a mustache that looked like he was trying too hard. "You see this, Dale?" The second officer, Pritchard, glanced at the ID and then at Kane with an expression that made Kane's stomach tighten. It wasn't confusion. It was contempt dressed up as suspicion. "Yeah, I see it." Whitmore crossed his arms. "Step over here, sir. Secondary screening." Kane kept his voice even. "Officer, I have TSA pre-check. My credentials are in order. I'm on official military travel orders." "I didn't ask about your travel orders," Whitmore said, louder now, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I said step over here." Kane moved to the secondary screening area, a small sectioned-off space with a metal table and a privacy screen that didn't provide much privacy. Other travelers were already staring. He could hear the whispers starting, see phones being pulled from pockets. He set his briefcase on the table and waited, hands visible, posture controlled. 22 years of military discipline kept his face calm even as his pulse kicked up. Whitmore followed him, Pritchard close behind. "Open the briefcase." Kane complied, revealing his DoD travel orders, a printed itinerary, a copy of the ceremony program, and a leather-bound portfolio. Whitmore pulled out the travel orders, scanned them with the same exaggerated skepticism, and tossed them back on the table. "These look too clean." "They were printed yesterday," Kane said quietly, "from my command." Whitmore picked up the military ID again, holding it up to the light, as if checking for watermarks. "This doesn't look right." Kane felt his jaw tighten, forced himself to relax it. "That's a standard DoD Common Access card. It's issued by—" "I know what it's supposed to be," Whitmore interrupted. "I'm saying this one doesn't look right, too new, too perfect." He glanced at Pritchard. "What do you think?" Pritchard leaned in, pretending to examine the card. "I think it's suspicious. Guy walks in here in a fancy uniform, brand new ID, says he's a colonel." He looked directly at Kane. "You know stolen valor is a federal crime, right?" The accusation landed like a slap. Kane felt the heat rise in his chest, but kept his voice level. "I'm aware of the law. I'm also aware that you can verify my identity through DEERS, through Marine Corps headquarters, or through the Defense Manpower Data Center, all of which would take less than 5 minutes. Whitmore ignored him and pulled out his radio. "Yeah, I need a supervisor to checkpoint Charlie, possible stolen valor situation." Kane's hands curled into fists at his sides, then deliberately relaxed. "Stay calm, stay professional, give them nothing." But around him the crowd was growing. A woman in business attire had her phone up, recording. A family with 2 kids stood frozen, the father whispering to his wife. And near the back of the pre-check line, a young man in Marine Corps combat utilities, a private first class, based on his rank insignia, was staring at Kane with wide eyes, his mouth half open in recognition. "Sir," the private called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Sir, is that?" "Stay in line, Marine," Kane said quietly, his command voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The private stopped, but his face had gone pale with shock. Whitmore's head snapped toward the private, then back to Kane. "You know him?" "No," Kane said truthfully, "but I know what he's thinking." "And what's that?" "That you're making a mistake." Pritchard stepped closer, invading Kane's space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "See, here's what I think. I think you bought this uniform online. I think you got yourself a fake ID made. And I think you're counting on people being too scared to call you out because of what you're wearing." Kane kept his eyes forward, refusing to engage with the bait. "My name is Colonel Jeremiah Thaddeus Kane, United States Marine Corps. My social security number is—" "I don't want your social," Whitmore cut him off. "I want you to stop pretending." "I'm not pretending anything." "Guys like you," Pritchard said, his voice dropping lower, meant only for Kane to hear, "always think you can fake your way into respect. Throw on a uniform, flash some ribbons, and people are supposed to bow down." He shook his head. "Not here." The private in utilities had moved closer, no longer able to stay silent. "Sir, that's Colonel Kane. He's the battalion commander at Paris Island. I saw him at—" "Get back in line," Pritchard barked, wheeling on the young Marine. "This doesn't concern you." "He's my last warning, son. Back in line." The private hesitated, looking torn between obedience to authority and loyalty to his commander. Kane caught his eye and gave a single, slight shake of his head. The private, face flushed with frustration, stepped back, but he didn't put his phone away. He was recording now, too. Whitmore's radio crackled, a woman's voice, clipped and professional. "Supervisor en route, ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes? Kane could do 3 minutes. He'd done a lot longer under a lot worse. But then Whitmore did something that changed the trajectory of the entire encounter. He reached for Kane's uniform jacket, fingers hooking the collar. "Let's see if you've got any identifying tattoos or marks that don't match this ID." Kane took one step back, his voice hardening. "Do not touch my uniform." "Or what?" Whitmore's hand was still on the collar. "Or you're assaulting a military officer." Pritchard laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You really committed to this, huh?" Around them more phones were out now, more witnesses. The businesswoman had moved closer. An older black man in a pilot's uniform stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. And on the table, forgotten by everyone except Kane, his personal cell phone began to vibrate. Once, twice, 3 times. The screen lit up with a name in all caps, Commandant USMC. Kane's eyes flicked to the phone. Whitmore noticed. "Expecting a call?" "Yes," Kane said quietly, "from my commanding officer." "Sure you are." Whitmore picked up the phone, glanced at the screen, and laughed. "Commandant USMC, you really went all in on this fantasy." He declined the call. The private in the background made a sound like he'd been punched. The phone buzzed again immediately, then again, 4 missed calls in under 2 minutes. Kane's pulse hammered in his ears, but his face remained a mask of control. "Officer Whitmore, I strongly suggest you allow me to answer that phone." "I strongly suggest you stop telling me what to do." "Brock," Pritchard said, glancing at the growing crowd, "maybe we should." "We should what? Let him walk because he's got a fancy costume and a persistent telemarketer?" Whitmore shook his head. No, I'm tired of people like him thinking they can fake their way through life. People like him, Kane repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Say what you mean, officer. Whitmore's face flushed. I mean people who. Sir, the private had pushed through the crowd, no longer able to stay silent. His voice was loud, desperate, cutting through the tension like a blade. Sir, please, that's Colonel Kane, he's. Pritchard moved fast, grabbing the private by the arm and pulling him back. I told you to stay out of this. Get your hands off that Marine, Kane said, his command voice echoing through the terminal, making heads turn 50 feet away. Or what? Pritchard sneered, still gripping the private's arm. Everything happened very fast after that. Kane took one step toward Pritchard, not aggressive, but protective, moving to intervene on behalf of the young Marine being manhandled. Whitmore interpreted it as a threat and grabbed Kane's arm. Kane instinctively pulled away, not violently, just the automatic response of a combat veteran who'd been trained never to let someone control his movement. Whitmore took it as resistance and shouted, "He's resisting." Pritchard released the private and lunged forward, and suddenly both officers had hands on Kane, pushing him toward the table, voices overlapping, shouting commands that contradicted each other. Hands behind your back. Don't move. Stop resisting. Kane wasn't resisting. He was standing perfectly still, arms out, trying to de-escalate, but it didn't matter. Whitmore was pulling out zip-tie cuffs. You are making a mistake, Kane said, his voice still calm, still controlled, but with an edge of steel underneath. I am a United States Marine Corps officer. I am not resisting. I am complying with all lawful orders, and in about 90 seconds, your supervisor is going to arrive and tell you exactly how badly you've just ended your career. Shut up, Whitmore said, and zip-tied Kane's wrists behind his back. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, the businesswoman yelling, "This is racial profiling." The pilot stepped forward, saying loudly, "I'm a witness, I'm recording all of this, and this is illegal." The private was shouting, "That's my battalion commander. You can't do this. Somebody call." "Everybody back," Pritchard yelled, one hand on his belt near his pepper spray. And then, cutting through the chaos like a knife, a woman's voice rang out, sharp and horrified. What in God's name is happening here? TSA Supervisor Brenda Okoye stood at the edge of the checkpoint, a tall black woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and an expression that could have frozen lava. She took in the scene in one sweeping glance. Kane in zip ties, the crowd of recording phones, Whitmore's defensive posture, Pritchard's hand still hovering near his pepper spray, the terrified private standing off to the side. Her eyes landed on Kane's uniform, on the silver star, on the rank insignia. Her face went ashen. "Brock," she said, her voice dropping into a register that suggested incoming catastrophe, "tell me you did not just handcuff a Marine Corps colonel." "He's not," Whitmore started. "Did you verify his credentials?" "They're fake." "Did you verify his credentials?" "Silence." Okoye walked to the table, picked up Kane's military ID, looked at it, then at Kane, then at the ID again. Her hand was shaking. "Colonel Kane." "Yes, ma'am." "Are you en route to Camp Lejeune?" "Yes, ma'am, for a ceremony at 1400 hours." Okoye closed her eyes briefly, like someone who just realized they were standing on the edge of a cliff. When she opened them, she picked up Kane's cell phone from the table. The screen showed 17 missed calls, 12 from Commandant USMC, 3 from BGEN Carter USMC, 2 from Camp LEJUNE OPS. She looked at Whitmore. "You declined calls from the Commandant of the Marine Corps." Whitmore's face had lost several shades of color. Okoye turned to Kane. "Sir, with your permission, I'm going to call this number back and explain what happened." "Please do," Kane said quietly. She dialed. It rang once. A man's voice answered, clipped and furious. "This is Brigadier General Marcus Carter, Chief of Staff to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Who the hell is this, and why is Colonel Kane not answering his phone?" Okoye's hand tightened around the phone. "General, this is Brenda Okoye, TSA Supervisor at Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta. Sir, there's been an incident. The line went silent for 3 full seconds. When the general spoke again, his voice was ice. Define incident. Sir, Colonel Kane has been detained at TSA security. He's currently in restraints. He's what? Sir, I'm handling it right now. I'm going to release him immediately and… You're going to do more than that, Ms. Okoye. You're going to put me on speaker right now. Okoye hit the speaker button, her hands still shaking. You're on speaker, General. Colonel Kane, this is General Carter. Are you injured? Kane's voice was steady. No, sir, I'm fine. Are you in any physical danger? No, sir. Good, stay on this line. The general's voice shifted, taking on the quality of a man who was about to burn down a building with words alone. Who is the senior law enforcement officer present? Pritchard and Whitmore looked at each other. Neither spoke. I asked a question, the general said, his voice dropping into a tone that could strip paint. Who is in charge? I'm the airport police officer on scene, Pritchard said weakly. Officer Dale Pritchard. Officer Pritchard, you have 30 seconds to remove those restraints from Colonel Kane, or I will have federal marshals at that airport before you finish your shift. Pritchard fumbled for his cuff key, hands shaking so badly he dropped it twice before getting the zip ties off. Kane rubbed his wrists, his face still impassive. Done, sir, Pritchard said. Good, now let me be extremely clear about what happens next. I'm currently standing in the office of the Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. He is on the phone with the Secretary of Homeland Security. In approximately 6 minutes, your airport director, your TSA Federal Security Director, and your Chief of Airport Police will all receive calls from very senior federal officials asking why one of our battalion commanders was assaulted by your personnel. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Pritchard whispered. I don't think you do. Colonel Kane was traveling to Camp Lejeune for a ceremony where the 38th Commandant of the Marine Corps was going to personally present him with the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious service. That ceremony is now in jeopardy because your officers decided to play make-believe with a decorated combat veteran's career. Whitmore had gone grey. Sir, we thought. I don't care what you thought, I care what you did. You racially profiled a field-grade officer in uniform. You ignored multiple forms of valid identification. You declined calls from Marine Corps headquarters. You physically restrained him without cause, and you did all of it in front of approximately 40 witnesses with phones. The general paused. How many of those witnesses do you think were recording? No one answered. Ms. Okoye, the general continued, I need you to secure all security footage from the last 30 minutes. TSA body cameras, airport police body cameras, checkpoint cameras, and any civilian footage you can identify. Federal investigators will be taking possession of all of it within the hour. Yes, sir, understood. Colonel Kane, a Marine Corps vehicle will be at the airport to pick you up in 20 minutes. Your flight is no longer necessary. And sir, the general's voice softened slightly. I apologize on behalf of the Corps. This should never have happened. Thank you, sir, Kane said quietly. The line went dead. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Then Okoye turned to Whitmore and Pritchard, and her expression was the bureaucratic equivalent of a funeral notice. Both of you, security office, now. Brenda, listen, Whitmore started. Supervisor Okoye, and you're done talking. She looked at the crowd, many still recording. Checkpoint Charlie is temporarily closed. Please proceed to Checkpoint Bravo or Delta. We apologize for the inconvenience. The private, who had been standing frozen through the entire exchange, finally moved. He walked up to Kane, came to attention and saluted. Sir, Private First Class Anthony Hayes, 2nd Battalion, I'm sorry, sir, I should have. Kane returned the salute, his face gentling slightly. You did fine, Private. Stand easy. Are you okay, sir? Kane looked at the young Marine, 19, maybe 20, face still showing the fear and fury of the last 15 minutes, and some of the iron control in his expression cracked just slightly. I'm fine, Hayes, but I appreciate you speaking up. That took guts. Sir, they had no right. No, Kane agreed. They didn't, but the system works even when the people in it don't. Remember that. Hayes nodded, swallowing hard, then returned to his position in line, where TSA agents were now scrambling to reopen the checkpoint and move people through with apologetic efficiency. Okoye escorted Whitmore and Pritchard toward the security office, their faces shell-shocked, and Kane stood alone at the checkpoint table, straightening his uniform with the same careful precision he'd used that morning in the mirror. The silver star caught the fluorescent light. His hands were steady. But inside, where no one could see, something had shifted. Not broken, he'd been through too much to break from this, but changed, tempered, like metal tested in fire. Behind him, the businesswoman who'd been recording approached cautiously. "Sir, I got all of it on video. If you need it for whatever happens next, I'll send it to whoever you want." Kane turned, and for the first time that morning, something close to a smile touched his face. "Thank you, ma'am. I suspect there will be a lot of people who want to see that video." She nodded, handed him a business card, and walked away. Kane looked down at his phone. 23 missed calls now. He dialed the Commandant's office. It rang once. "Colonel Kane, this is the Commandant. Are you secure?" "Yes, sir, I'm fine." "Good." A pause. "Jeremiah, I want you to know something. What happened to you this morning is unacceptable, inexcusable, and there will be consequences." "Sir, I appreciate that, but—" "There's no but, Colonel. You were assaulted because 2 officers looked at your skin and decided your uniform must be fake. That's not a security failure, that's racism." The Commandant's voice was hard. "And we don't tolerate it, not in the military and not from anyone who interacts with our Marines. Your vehicle is en route. Get to Lejeune. We're still doing this ceremony. You earned that Legion of Merit, and you're going to receive it." "Yes, sir." "And Colonel, when this is over, when the investigations are done and the dust settles, I want you to tell this story. I want people to know what happened, because sunlight is the best disinfectant." Kane closed his eyes briefly. "Understood, sir." When he hung up, the terminal had returned to something like normal operation. Travelers streamed through security. Announcements echoed overhead. Life went on, but somewhere in the airport's security office, 2 careers were ending. And in offices across Washington, D.C., phones were ringing, and people with titles like Director and Secretary and Inspector General were being briefed on a 15-minute incident that was about to become a federal case study in everything that could go wrong when bias wore a badge. Kane picked up his briefcase, adjusted his cover, and walked toward the exit to wait for his ride. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from General Carter. "News crews are already calling. This is going to be everywhere by tonight. Prepare yourself." Kane read it, pocketed the phone, and kept walking. Somewhere in the terminal, Private Hayes watched his battalion commander leave and thought about what he'd just witnessed. Not just the injustice of it, though that burned in his chest like acid, but the way Colonel Kane had handled it. The discipline, the restraint, the refusal to give them an excuse. That, Hayes thought, was what a Marine looked like. And somewhere in a security office, Brock Whitmore stared at a wall and realized that the phone calls he'd declined that morning hadn't been from a telemarketer. They'd been from the man who could end his career with a single sentence. And he just had. Within 7 minutes of General Carter's call, the first domino fell. TSA Federal Security Director Amanda Grave received a call from the TSA administrator in Washington, D.C., a woman named Patricia Holcomb who rarely called anyone directly unless careers were about to end. Grave was in a budget meeting when her assistant interrupted, face pale, mouthing the words, "It's the administrator." Grave excused herself, stepped into the hallway, and answered. "Amanda, we have a situation at your facility," Holcomb said, her voice tight. "A Marine Corps colonel in full dress blues was detained, restrained, and accused of stolen valor by one of your officers approximately 18 minutes ago. The Secretary of Homeland Security just called me personally. The Commandant of the Marine Corps is involved, and I'm told there are at least 24 civilian videos already circulating on social media. Grav felt the floor tilt beneath her. Ma'am, I haven't been briefed on any. You're being briefed now. The officer's name is Brock Whitmore. Find him, secure all footage, and get me a preliminary report in the next 30 minutes, because the secretary wants answers and I have none. Holcomb paused. Amanda, this is bad. This is congressional hearing bad. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Then move. The line went dead. Grav was already walking toward the security office, her mind racing through protocols, liability concerns, and the sinking realization that Brock Whitmore, who she'd personally flagged twice for retraining after passenger complaints, had finally done exactly what she'd warned him not to do. She passed Checkpoint Charlie, saw the crowd of travelers still whispering and pointing, saw TSA agents trying to restore order, and felt her stomach drop further. By the time she reached the security office, Supervisor Okoye was already there with Whitmore and Pritchard, both men sitting in chairs like students called to the principal's office. Okoye stood when Grav entered, and the expression on her face told Grav everything she needed to know. Ma'am, Okoye said quietly, we have a problem. I'm aware. Grav looked at Whitmore. Body camera now. Whitmore's hand moved to the small camera clipped to his uniform shirt. He pulled it off and handed it over without a word, his face the color of old newspaper. Grav connected it to the office computer and pulled up the footage. The timestamp read 07:42:33. She hit play. The first 30 seconds showed routine checkpoint activity. Then Colonel Kane appeared in frame, walking toward the pre-check podium in dress blues that were clearly regulation, clearly professional, clearly real. Grav watched Whitmore's eyes track Kane, watched the way his posture changed, shoulders squaring, jaw tightening. She'd seen that shift before in officers who profiled. It was the moment bias took over. The audio was damning. This says Colonel, Whitmore's voice, skeptical, dismissive. Kane's response, calm and professional, yes, sir, that's correct. Then Whitmore to Pritchard, you see this, Dale? And Pritchard, his voice dripping with contempt, yeah, I see it. Grav felt her hands curl into fists as she watched the encounter escalate, watched Whitmore ignore Kane's credentials, watched him decline the phone calls from the Commandant, the timestamp showing 17 declined calls in 12 minutes, watched him reach for Kane's uniform jacket, and then, at timestamp 07:51:08, she heard Whitmore's voice quieter, meant only for Pritchard, but picked up clearly by the body camera microphone. These people always think they're special. These people. Grav stopped the footage. The silence in the room was suffocating. Ms. Okoye, Grav said, her voice dangerously calm, pull Pritchard's body camera as well, and send a request to Airport IT for all checkpoint surveillance footage from 7:30 to 800 hours. Flag it as a federal investigation priority. Yes, ma'am. Grav turned to Whitmore. You're suspended effective immediately. Badge and radio on the desk. Whitmore's mouth opened. Director, I was just. You racially profiled a decorated military officer. You ignored valid federal identification. You physically restrained a Marine Corps colonel without cause. You declined urgent calls from his chain of command. And you did all of it while saying these people on a recorded device. Grav leaned forward. Your career is over, Brock. The only question now is whether you face criminal charges. I didn't know. You didn't verify, that's the problem. Grav straightened. Get out of my airport. If you're still here in 5 minutes, I'm calling Atlanta PD to escort you out. Whitmore stood slowly, placed his badge and radio on the desk with shaking hands, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. Grav turned to Pritchard. You're next. Atlanta Airport Police will handle your termination, but you're done working in federal facilities. I'll personally see to that. Pritchard's face had gone from pale to gray. I was just backing up my partner. You participated in a civil rights violation. That's not backup, that's complicity. Grav gestured to the door. Out. Pritchard left. Okoye remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I called for a supervisor the moment I saw what was happening, but I should have moved faster. I should have." "You did your job, Brenda," Grave said quietly. "You intervened. You called it up the chain. You secured the scene." She exhaled slowly. "This isn't on you. This is on a system that let Whitmore keep his job after 11 documented complaints." 11, Okoye's eyes widened. 11, Grave confirmed. All of them from minority passengers, all of them claiming racial profiling, all of them dismissed as misunderstandings or communication issues. She sat down heavily in her chair. "I tried to remove him last year. HR said we didn't have enough evidence. Well, we have it now." Outside the office, Grave could hear voices rising in pitch. News crews maybe, or just travelers who'd witnessed the incident and were demanding answers. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from the airport director, 2 from the Atlanta FBI field office, 1 from a number she didn't recognize but had a Washington, D.C. area code. Her email refreshed. A new message from the DHS Inspector General's office. Preliminary investigation opened. All personnel involved are to preserve evidence and refrain from discussing the incident with media pending review. Too late for that, Grave thought. By now the videos were everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. She opened Twitter on her phone and searched Marine Colonel TSA. The first result had 47,000 retweets. The video showed Kane in restraints, Whitmore declining phone calls, and Private Hayes shouting, "That's my battalion commander," in the background. The caption read, "Black Marine Colonel handcuffed at TSA for stolen valor. This is America." The comments section was on fire. Outrage, fury, calls for terminations, lawsuits, federal intervention. Someone had already identified Whitmore by his name tag and found his public Facebook profile, where his liked pages included several far-right political groups and at least 2 pages that had been flagged for racist content. Grave closed the app. This was going to get worse before it got better. Her phone rang, the airport director. "Amanda, my office, now, and bring everything you have on Officer Whitmore." "Yes, sir." She grabbed Whitmore's personnel file from the locked cabinet, a folder that had grown disturbingly thick over the years, and headed out. As she walked through the terminal, she passed Checkpoint Charlie again. The crowd had grown. Travelers stood in clusters, some still recording, others being interviewed by what looked like local news reporters who'd arrived with predatory speed. And in the center of it all, standing exactly where Colonel Kane had been restrained 28 minutes ago, was a small memorial someone had started. A folded American flag, a handwritten sign that read, "Respect the uniform," and a Marine Corps challenge coin left on the floor. Grave stopped, looked at it for a long moment, and kept walking. Somewhere in that airport, justice was beginning to move, slowly, bureaucratically, but moving. The airport director's office was standing room only by the time Grave arrived. Director Marcus Chen sat behind his desk, his face carved from stone. Beside him stood Atlanta Airport Police Chief Raymond Torres, a compact man with close-cropped gray hair and the expression of someone watching his department's reputation go up in flames. Also present, 2 lawyers from the airport authority, a representative from the Atlanta FBI field office, and a woman in a sharp suit who introduced herself as Special Agent Lisa Nakamura from the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Chen didn't waste time. "Catch me up, everything." Grave laid out the timeline, the initial stop, the ignored credentials, the physical restraint, the declined calls, the body camera footage. When she finished, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. "Show me the footage," Chen said. Grave connected her laptop to the conference room screen and played the body camera video. All of it, every excruciating minute. The room watched in silence as Whitmore profiled Kane as Pritchard backed him up. As the situation escalated from a traffic stop into a federal incident. When the audio picked up Whitmore's "these people" comment, one of the lawyers swore under his breath. Chen stopped the video. "How many complaints has Whitmore had?" 11, Grave said. "All from minority passengers, all alleging racial profiling or excessive use of authority. And he was still working checkpoints. Yes, sir. Why? Grave hesitated. HR determined there wasn't sufficient evidence to support termination. He was given retraining after the 5th and 8th complaints. After the 11th, I recommended reassignment to non-passenger-facing duties. That recommendation was pending review. Pending, Chen's voice could have frozen nitrogen. We had 11 red flags, and we let him keep direct contact with travelers. No one answered. Chief Torres spoke up, his voice rough. Officer Pritchard has 8 complaints on his record as well, 6 for excessive force, 2 for discriminatory behavior. He was flagged in a DHS audit last year as high risk for civil rights violations. And Chen asked. And we put him on a performance improvement plan. He completed it 6 months ago. Clearly it didn't work. Chen turned to the DOJ agent. Special Agent Nakamura, what are we looking at here? Nakamura had been taking notes throughout the briefing. She set down her pen and looked at Chen directly. Based on what I've seen and heard, the Department of Justice will be opening a formal civil rights investigation under Title VI and 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. We'll be examining not just this incident, but the pattern of complaints against both officers and the institutional failures that allowed them to remain in their positions. She paused. We'll also be looking at whether airport policies and training adequately address racial bias and excessive force. Are we talking about a consent decree? One of the lawyers asked. We are talking about whatever is necessary to ensure this doesn't happen again, Nakamura said evenly. But yes, a consent decree is likely. Chen closed his eyes briefly. A federal consent decree meant years of oversight, mandatory reforms, and the public acknowledgement that the airport had systematically failed to protect civil rights. It was institutional humiliation codified in law. What about criminal charges? Torres asked quietly. That's up to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Nakamura said. But false imprisonment, deprivation of rights under color of law, and assault are all on the table. The fact that Colonel Kane is a federal employee, a military officer, makes this a federal case regardless of state law. Grave felt something cold settle in her stomach. Whitmore and Pritchard weren't just losing their jobs, they were facing prison time. Chen's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression somehow got even grimmer. The Commandant's office just issued a public statement. He read from his phone, "The Marine Corps is appalled by the treatment of Colonel Jeremiah Kane at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Colonel Kane is a decorated combat veteran and exemplary officer who was subjected to racial profiling and unlawful detention while traveling on official orders. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and expect full accountability for all parties involved." He set the phone down. It's already on every major news outlet. The lawyer who'd sworn earlier pulled out his own phone, scrolled for a moment and looked up. CNN is running it as breaking news. Fox, MSNBC, AP, Reuters, everyone has it. And the video is viral. 3.2 million views on Twitter alone. "Lord help us," Torres muttered. "Lord isn't going to help us," Chen said flatly. "We are going to help ourselves by doing everything exactly right from this point forward." He looked at Grave. "Whitmore is terminated for cause, effective immediately. I want every document related to his employment sealed and preserved for the investigation." "Already done, sir." "Good," he turned to Torres. "Pritchard." "He'll be terminated by end of business today," Torres said. "I've also initiated the process to revoke his law enforcement certification through the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. He won't work as a cop again, not in this state." "Make it nationwide," Chen said. "I want him flagged in every federal database. FBI, DHS, DOJ. If he tries to get a job at a MAL security desk in Montana, I want them to know what he did here." Torres nodded grimly. Chen looked at the DOJ agent. "What do you need from us?" "Full cooperation," Nakamura said. "All personnel files, training records, body camera footage, security camera footage, and any internal communications related to either officer. We'll also need access to HR records showing how complaints were handled, and I'll need to interview everyone who witnessed the incident, including Colonel Kane, when he's available. You'll have it all, Chen promised. Grav, coordinate with Special Agent Nakamura. Whatever she needs, she gets. Yes, sir. The FBI representative, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. We're also looking at the social media angle. Officer Whitmore's online activity suggests affiliations with extremist groups. If this was ideologically motivated, if he was targeting Colonel Kane specifically because of his race, that's a hate crime enhancement. The room went very quiet. Jesus, one of the lawyers whispered. Chen stood, signaling the meeting was over. Here's what happens next. We issue a public apology to Colonel Kane. We announce the terminations. We commit to full cooperation with all investigations. And we start implementing reforms immediately, bias training, complaint review procedures, everything. He looked at each person in the room. This airport moves 100 million passengers a year. We do not get to fail at civil rights. We do not get to sweep this under the rug. We fix it, understood. Murmurs of agreement. Good, get to work. 3 weeks later, Colonel Jeremiah Kane stood at a podium in the TSA's National Training Facility in Glencoe, Georgia, in front of 340 TSA officers, supervisors, and executives who'd been assembled for the first mandatory civil rights training session mandated by the consent decree. The settlement had been finalized 5 days earlier. $8.5 million to Colonel Kane, federal oversight of airport security operations for 5 years, and a complete overhaul of complaint procedures and bias training. Kane hadn't wanted to be there. He'd wanted to return to Paris Island, to his Marines, to the work he'd spent 22 years building, but the Commandant had asked him personally. Tell them what it felt like, the Commandant had said. Make them understand. So Kane stood at the podium in his service uniform, not dress blues this time, but the working uniform of a Marine officer, and looked out at an audience that had gone absolutely silent. Some faces showed shame, others showed defensiveness, a few showed genuine curiosity. He began. My name is Colonel Jeremiah Thaddeus Kane, United States Marine Corps. On the morning of November 14th, I was traveling through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to receive the Legion of Merit from the Commandant of the Marine Corps. I never made it to my flight. He walked them through it, every detail, the initial stop, the skepticism, the ignored credentials, the restraints, the declined phone calls. He didn't spare them anything, but he also didn't embellish. Just the facts, delivered in the same calm, professional tone he'd used that morning when he'd told Whitmore and Pritchard they were making a mistake. I want to be clear about something, Kane said. This wasn't just about 2 officers making a bad decision. This was about a system that allowed those officers to make that decision 11 times before someone finally stopped them. Officer Whitmore had been flagged. He'd been complained about. He'd been retrained. And he was still working checkpoints, still making assumptions about who belonged in a military uniform based on the color of their skin. He paused, letting that sink in. The uniform doesn't make you immune to hate, he continued, echoing the line he'd told General Carter weeks ago, but accountability makes hate harder to hide. What happened to me that morning was caught on 6 security cameras and 23 civilian phones. It was documented, time-stamped, and preserved. And because of that documentation, justice happened. But how many times has this happened when the cameras weren't rolling? How many times has someone been profiled, humiliated, or worse, and there was no evidence, no witnesses, no accountability? The room was utterly silent. Kane could see people shifting in their seats, uncomfortable with the questions he was asking because they knew the answers. I'm not here to make you feel bad, Kane said. I'm here to make you think. To make you look at the person in front of you and see them, really see them, before you make assumptions. To ask yourself, am I treating this person differently because of how they look? Am I requiring extra proof because my bias tells me they don't fit? Am I ignoring protocol because I've already decided who they are? He gripped the edges of the podium. I served this country for 22 years. I've been shot at, mortared, and blown up. I've lost friends in combat. I've led Marines through some of the hardest fights of the last 2 decades, and the worst day of my military career wasn't in Fallujah or Helmand province. It was in an airport terminal in Atlanta, being handcuffed and accused of stolen valor by 2 men who looked at my skin and decided I couldn't possibly be who my uniform said I was. Someone in the 3rd row, a young TSA officer who couldn't have been more than 25, raised her hand tentatively. Kane nodded at her. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking slightly, How do we make sure this doesn't happen again?" Kane looked at her for a long moment. It was the right question, the only question that mattered. "You start by believing people," he said. "You start by following protocol instead of your assumptions. You start by asking questions instead of making accusations. And when you see something wrong, when you see a colleague profiling someone or targeting someone or crossing a line, you speak up. You don't back them up. You don't stay silent. You intervene, because silence is complicity, and complicity makes you part of the problem." He stepped back from the podium. "Officer Whitmore and Officer Pritchard aren't here today. They were terminated. They're facing federal charges. Their careers are over, but this isn't just about them. This is about all of us, about the choices we make every single day when we put on a uniform and interact with the public, about whether we use our authority to serve and protect or to profile and punish." He looked out at the crowd one last time. "I hope you choose service. I hope you choose dignity. And I hope that the next time you see someone who doesn't fit your idea of what they should be, you remember this story. You remember what it cost 2 officers who decided their bias was more important than the truth." Kane stepped down from the podium. The room erupted in applause, not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine, sustained applause that carried weight. The young officer who'd asked the question was crying. The TSA administrator, who'd been sitting in the front row, stood and shook Kane's hand, her own eyes red. "Thank you, Colonel," she said quietly, "for your service and for your grace." Kane nodded but didn't smile. Grace wasn't what this was. This was survival. This was a black man in America doing what black men in America had always done, maintaining dignity in the face of indignity, demanding justice while knowing justice came slow, and standing tall even when the system tried to push him down. He left the training facility and walked to his car. His phone buzzed. A text from the Commandant, "Proud of you, Jeremiah, that took guts." Kane replied, "Just doing my duty, sir." He drove back to Paris Island, back to his Marines, back to the work of building the next generation of leaders who would, hopefully, live in a world where wearing the uniform was enough, where credentials mattered more than skin color, where service was respected regardless of who was serving. But he wasn't naive. He knew that world was still a long way off. He also knew that every story like his, every moment of accountability, every officer who lost their job for choosing bias over duty, moved that world a little bit closer. So he would keep serving, keep leading, keep standing tall in his dress blues and daring anyone to question whether he'd earned them. Because he had. And no amount of prejudice could take that away. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Department of Justice released its findings from the investigation into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's security operations. The report was 347 pages long and documented systematic failures in complaint handling, bias training, and accountability measures. It found that minority passengers were 3.7 times more likely to be subjected to secondary screening than white passengers, even when controlling for risk factors. It found that complaints against TSA and airport police officers were routinely dismissed without proper investigation. And it found that officers like Whitmore and Pritchard had been allowed to continue working despite clear patterns of discriminatory behavior. The consent decree that followed mandated 5 years of federal oversight, quarterly bias audits, mandatory body cameras for all security personnel, and an independent complaint review board with subpoena power. Brock Whitmore pleaded guilty to deprivation of rights under color of law and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Dale Pritchard took a plea deal and received probation in exchange for testimony against Whitmore, but his law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. Colonel Jeremiah Kane was promoted to full colonel and given command of a Marine Expeditionary Unit. He never spoke publicly about the incident again, but his story became required reading at every military academy and federal law enforcement training program in the country. And in Terminal B of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, near Checkpoint Charlie, there's now a small plaque that reads, "Service knows no color, respect knows no rank, justice knows no compromise. In honor of all who serve, and in memory of what happens when we forget." It doesn't mention Colonel Kane by name, but everyone who works there knows exactly what it means and why it's there.